Mocking laughter rippled through the pristine hangar as Thomas Wilson parked his weathered pickup truck on the gleaming tarmac of Ridgecrest Executive Airfield. Behind the crystal-clear glass of the VIP lounge, executives in tailored Italian suits exchanged incredulous glances and barely concealed smirks as the 40-year-old black mechanic, his hands bearing the badges of hard labor, hefted his dented, trusty toolbox from the truck bed. "Is this the specialist they summoned for Mrs. Mitchell's aircraft?" sneered Edward Chambers, operations director for Mitchell Aviation, his voice dripping with condescension. "I thought we requested the finest technician in the region, not someone who appears to have just crawled out from under a roadside repair shop." Thomas heard every cutting word, but held his head high, dignity intact. This dismissive treatment wasn't new territory for him. What not a single person there recognized was that those calloused hands had rescued more luxury aircraft than all the certified technicians at that airfield combined. 15 years repairing executive jets, 4 national awards for technical excellence, yet his skin color made a stronger impression than his extraordinary credentials. "Mrs. Mitchell's jet needs to depart in 2 hours," the runway supervisor informed him, maintaining a deliberate distance. "Our team hasn't been able to pinpoint the issue. If you can't resolve it in time, we'll have to call in the Houston specialists." The Bombardier Global 8000 glistened in the morning sunlight like a flawless $70 million diamond. As Thomas approached, he felt eyes following his every move through the terminal windows. Judgmental eyes, skeptical eyes, and one pair that stood apart, observant, calculating, intrigued. "Let him work," a commanding female voice ordered, slicing through the tense silence. Victoria Mitchell, 45, CEO of Mitchell Aviation and owner of the jet, strode purposefully across the tarmac. Her charcoal gray suit perfectly complemented her impeccably styled blonde hair. She didn't acknowledge the executives, focusing solely on Thomas. "How much time do you need?" "Depends on the problem, ma'am," Thomas replied, meeting her gaze without flinching. "You have 1 hour," Victoria stated firmly, glancing at her wristwatch, a timepiece worth more than Thomas's yearly income. "Impressed me." As the executives retreated to their climate-controlled sanctuary, Thomas opened the main access panel and immediately grasped the gravity of the situation. The pressurization system had suffered a catastrophic failure that previous technicians had misdiagnosed as a simple electrical issue. If this jet takes off as is, the cabin would lose pressure at 45,000 feet. Everyone aboard would die. His hands moved with the precision of a surgeon as he set to work. No one realized he wasn't merely making repairs. He was literally saving lives. From his peripheral vision, he noticed Victoria Mitchell watching him intently through the glass, her gaze unlike the others. It wasn't contempt. Was it recognition? 30 minutes later, problem solved. Thomas closed the panel, wiped his hands on a threadbare cloth, and began collecting his tools. His job was complete. No thanks necessary. They rarely were. For men like him, flawless work was the bare minimum expectation, never a cause for celebration. Then Victoria Mitchell emerged from the terminal again, this time alone. She walked directly to Thomas, ignoring the bewildered expressions from her staff. "How long would it have taken them to discover the actual problem?" she asked, her voice measured. "They never would have," Thomas answered candidly. "The jet would have crashed with everyone aboard before then." The silence that followed hung heavy in the air. Victoria's eyes examined Thomas with unsettling intensity. "Come with me," she ordered, surprising everyone, especially Edward Chambers, who watched the scene with mounting discomfort. Now, what no one at that airfield could have possibly imagined was that this moment transcended a repaired jet or lives saved. It marked the beginning of a story that would challenge generations of deep-rooted prejudice and expose truths the aviation elite had desperately concealed for decades. The most shocking revelation? The man who had just saved that jet had designed the pressurization system that equipped half of Mitchell Aviation's fleet, a system for which Edward Chambers had received all the credit in subsequent promotions. The executives' eyes tracked Thomas and Victoria as they walked away from the jet, leaving a wake of speculation and nervous whispers. Edward Chambers observed the scene with his face contorted into a mask of anxiety, his body tense like a bowstring about to snap. "My office, now," Victoria commanded, leading Thomas to a section of the terminal few employees were permitted to enter. Not a single word passed between them during their walk, only the sound of their footsteps echoing through the polished corridors. The private office was the perfect blend of luxury and functionality. Victoria closed the door, gestured for Thomas to take a seat, and positioned herself behind her desk. "Did you tell me your full name?" she asked, her eyes studying every detail of him. "Thomas Wilson." A weighty silence filled the room as she typed something into her tablet. Her eyes widened slightly. "Thomas Wilson," she murmured softly, eyes fixed on her screen. "The initials engraved on all the original designs for our P9 pressurization system." Thomas remained outwardly composed, but his fingers tensed noticeably on the armrest. "She knows. 3 patents, 4 innovation awards, a master's degree in aerospace engineering from Southeastern Institute of Technology." Her voice grew increasingly incredulous. "And yet you repair jets like a common mechanic. Why?" "Because no one hires a black engineer from the East Side to lead development teams," he replied without a moment's hesitation. "And mechanics have bills to pay, Ms. Mitchell." Victoria opened a drawer and extracted a thick folder. Inside lay corporate documents detailing the development of the P9 system, all bearing Edward Chambers' signature as chief engineer. "Do you know how much profit that system has generated for my company over the past 5 years?" she asked, leafing through the papers with deliberate care. "Approximately $452 million, Thomas answered precisely. "The system reduced fuel consumption by 25% and maintenance costs by 33%. Victoria looked up, visibly struck by the precision of his response. "Edward has received 3 promotions and a $2.8 million bonus for his work," she continued, her voice tightening on the final word. While I continued to fix jets," Thomas finished, his expression betraying nothing, though a storm raged within. Their exchange was abruptly interrupted by forceful knocking. Edward Chambers barged in without awaiting permission, his face a peculiar blend of manufactured concern and poorly disguised panic. "Victoria, the board is waiting for you on the video conference, and we need to discuss." He froze mid-sentence upon noticing Thomas, his expression hardening instantly. "What is he still doing here? The service is complete, correct?" "Actually, we were discussing intellectual property," Victoria replied with deliberate calmness, "specifically the P9 system." Chambers' face drained of color. "I don't understand what a mechanic would have to contribute to this discussion." "Really? Interesting, because I have here the original P9 designs with the initials TW, and I've just discovered they belong to Thomas Wilson, who worked briefly in the development department 5 years ago." "Victoria, this is preposterous." Chambers forced a laugh that rang hollow. "He was merely an assistant technician. The P9 system was developed entirely by my team." Just then, the door swung open again. A distinguished woman entered, carrying a briefcase even more substantial than Victoria's. Dr. Olivia Park, Mitchell Aviation's general counsel, whom Thomas recognized from company press releases. "Forgive my tardiness, Victoria," she said, acknowledging Thomas with a respectful nod before turning to Chambers with a glacial stare. "I've thoroughly verified the intellectual property records. The digital signature on the original files unquestionably matches Mr. Wilson's, not yours, Edward." Chambers appeared to suffocate on his own words. "There must be some mistake. He worked under my supervision. Any contribution was minimal at best." "Minimal?" Victoria interjected sharply, opening another file on her tablet. "Edward, I have emails here from you to Human Resources recommending Mr. Wilson's termination for technical incompetence, exactly 3 days after he submitted the complete P9 project to the internal system." Thomas observed the unfolding scene with a serenity that astonished even himself. 5 years ago, when security had escorted him from the building like a criminal, humiliating him before his entire team, he had vowed the truth would eventually surface. He never imagined it happening like this. So sudden, so absolute. "Mr. Wilson," Victoria said, turning toward him, "Dr. Park has prepared documentation she'd like you to review. Essentially, we're proposing retroactive acknowledgement of your authorship, financial compensation for royalties owed, and a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" Thomas asked, maintaining his composure despite his racing heart. "The kind that makes history," she replied before pivoting to Chambers. "Edward, you are temporarily relieved of your duties pending the conclusion of our internal investigation. Please surrender your security badge immediately." Chambers faltered, his face contorting with barely contained fury. "You can't possibly do this. The board would never." "The board will be fully briefed within the hour," Victoria cut him off. "And if you wish to preserve any semblance of dignity, I strongly suggest you exit through that door now, before I decide to summon security." When Chambers departed, slamming the door with vindictive force, Victoria turned to Thomas and Olivia. "Now we can truly begin. What transpired over the next 2 hours would transform not only Thomas's future, but the entire power structure within Mitchell Aviation. As Olivia meticulously reviewed the legal documents, Thomas noticed something unexpected about Victoria Mitchell. She wasn't merely correcting an injustice. There was something deeper in her eyes, a recognition, an understanding of something far more significant. What remained hidden from view was that Victoria Mitchell harbored a secret of her own. Her briefcase contained not only documentation about the P9 system, but a comprehensive 2-year investigation into systematic patterns of discrimination and intellectual theft within her own company. Thomas Wilson wasn't the first victim, just the most brilliant and the one who had left the most incontrovertible evidence. Victoria had patiently awaited the perfect moment to dismantle the entire corrupt system from within. Meanwhile, in the airfield parking lot, Edward Chambers made a desperate call to his board allies. His empire was crumbling beneath him, yet he believed he still held a trump card, documents and connections that could not only destroy Thomas's career, but potentially bring down Victoria Mitchell herself. What he failed to realize was that his every movement was being monitored, every call recorded. The real battle was only beginning. Victoria's private conference room existed in a reality separate from the rest of the airfield. Thomas shifted uneasily in the luxurious leather chair as she closed the door, sealing them off from the bustle of the terminal. At the center of this remarkable transformation stood Thomas Wilson, no longer an anonymous mechanic, but director of technological innovation, leading the division that had created the revolutionary P9 system. The extraordinary shareholders' meeting that had taken place months earlier had etched itself into American corporate history. Victoria Mitchell, with Dr. Park at her side, had presented damning evidence of systematic discrimination and intellectual theft, culminating in the devastating recording of Edward Chambers. "We need to eliminate this uppity mechanic," Chambers' voice had reverberated through the crowded auditorium speakers. "Take ownership of the system, erase any trace of his authorship. Who would believe that a black man from the East Side created something this sophisticated? Our clients trust us, not people like him." The silence that followed felt suffocating, broken only by a swelling murmur of outrage. The company's stock plummeted 21% that day, but what followed surprised even the most cynical observers. "I could have pursued an individual lawsuit," Thomas explained in his first interview with the prestigious Aviation Quarterly. But the problem extended far beyond Edward Chambers. It was deeply systemic. The solution proposed by Thomas and wholeheartedly championed by Victoria proved revolutionary: create a comprehensive program to identify and compensate all employees whose intellectual property had been appropriated over the past decade. More radically, they established an innovation fund specifically targeting historically marginalized communities. Edward Chambers, meanwhile, faced multiple lawsuits. His professional credentials were revoked, his reputation destroyed. The man who had once sneered at Thomas on the tarmac now couldn't secure even entry-level consulting work at second-tier firms. "Revenge was never my objective," Thomas confided to Victoria during the ribbon-cutting ceremony of the Mitchell Aviation-funded Community Technology Development Center. "Justice was, visibility was." The center, established in the very neighborhood where Thomas had grown up, offered advanced technical training to young people without access to quality formal education. Under his guidance, 3 groundbreaking patents had already emerged from students in the program. "You know what's truly ironic?" Victoria remarked, watching a group of teenagers enthusiastically working on a prototype. "If Chambers had simply shared credit with you, he'd still be director today." Greed blinds people to the potential of others. Even more astonishing was the proposal Victoria extended to Thomas 3 months after his hiring. It wasn't merely a management position she offered, but a partnership, both literally and figuratively. "I thought she'd lost her mind when she suggested a merger," Thomas confessed during a 60 Minutes interview. "Not a marriage as rumors suggested, but a business merger. My small engineering firm, which I'd kept operational from my garage throughout those 5 years as a mechanic, was now valued at 30% of Mitchell Aviation." The former executives who had mocked him that fateful morning on the runway were no longer laughing. Some resigned, unable to serve under his leadership. Others remained, learning through experience that talent and competence transcend color. On the 1-year anniversary of the incident, Victoria organized a special commemoration. All employees were invited to witness the launch of the new propulsion system developed by Thomas's team, technology that would reduce fuel consumption in commercial aircraft by an unprecedented 42%. A year ago, many of you witnessed a black man being ridiculed while literally saving lives. Victoria began her address. Today, that same man is saving our industry, our planet, and most importantly, he's preserving dreams that might otherwise have been suffocated by prejudice. Thomas surveyed the audience, recognizing faces that had once treated him with contempt, but now offered standing ovations. He felt no particular pride in those transformations. He knew some applauded from self-interest rather than genuine change of heart. But the young, diverse engineers who now occupied positions previously unattainable, for them, every struggle had been worthwhile. In the front row sat an unexpected figure. His mother, Mrs. Wilson, 74, who had worked as a hospital custodian her entire life so he could attend college. Her eyes brimmed with tears of vindication and pride. Real change, Thomas concluded in his powerful speech, voice occasionally breaking with emotion, doesn't merely occur when individuals like me break through barriers to achieve success. It happens when we deliberately hold those doors open and ensure that extraordinary talent isn't wasted because of baseless prejudices. True justice isn't just individual, it's structural. The story of the mechanic who became co-owner inspired an entire generation of young engineers from marginalized communities. Similar programs began emerging at other corporations, partly due to mounting social pressure, partly because they witnessed the undeniable success of Mitchell Aviation. After embracing diversity, not as a marketing slogan, but as concrete practice. Success could never erase the scars left by a lifetime of prejudice, but it provided Thomas with a powerful platform to transform outrage into positive impact. As he watched young students at his community center, he recognized that his greatest triumph wasn't his position or his wealth, but the look in those young people's eyes, unburdened by the doubt he had carried for decades. The most powerful response to prejudice has never been individual success, he often reminded his mentees, but creating pathways for others to follow, free from the obstacles that nearly destroyed my dreams. When asked what he would tell his younger self, Thomas paused, his eyes momentarily distant. I'd tell him that sometimes the most dignified act isn't just climbing over walls, it's tearing them down completely so others won't have to climb so high just to receive a fair chance. In the end, what changed wasn't just a company policy or an industry standard. What changed was the very notion of what brilliance looks like and where it can be found if only we have the wisdom to recognize it.